Understanding how people feel and act in the world. Why do you have your preferences, desires? What's easy, hard, delightful for you? What other people think? How do they think, feel? How we perceive the world, see, hear, think, feel. Personality, behavior. Development from childhood and infancy. Social interactions. How the brain support and contributes to aspects of being person. Things are interpretations of the world around us. At different levels of thought, feeling, and perception. Our mind determines the world that we experience, see, act. Determined by inferences and deductions that our minds make. Seeing. We see something, we believe it. We have visual illusions. It's not that our visual system is messed up. It's that a lot of things our visual system is brilliant at. But it's brilliant by having certain laws that it follows. We follow those principles by seeing that. When we mess with a typical circumstance, those principles calculate the wrong answer. Even for the size of a circle. Your mind is making inferences. Following rules and principles that determine what it's you think that you see. The perspective cues make the more distant one look much bigger. The crisscross illusion. The Kafka ring. White's illusion. Simultaneous contrast effect. The context determining how to interpret it thing. So, things as simple as how bright something is or how long something is, depend on interpretation. The source of the illumination is now where you're used to. So, you're misinterpreting where the illumination is coming from for the depth of the face. So, even for simple things, our minds make certain assumptions about how we interpret the world. That drives what we see and how we act upon what we see. Trained seal act vs a costume ball. You hand an expectation of what you were going to see. The expectations drive your interpretation of the thing you see next. Your interpretation, beliefs, guide what you think you see and how you interpret the situation. For all things. Also, we have limited attentional resources. We can pay attention to a limited number of things at a time. Even if they're in front of us. Our attention is focused or occupied by something else. We can pay attention to a thing at a time under many circumstances. And the other things escape us completely, even if they are present to us. 2 Hear. McGurk effect demo. Most people think they hear da. In their mind they do, that's how they interpret what they're hearing. In reality you hear ba. See the lip movements ga. Your mind intertwines across modalities what you see and hear. Integrates them below your level of consciousness. And you came with a different interpretation of what you hear. Your mind interpreted what you hear, not your ear interpreting what you hear. 3 No. Why do imagine that something is further east? If we have never seen a real global map. So, some of our knowledge guide how we think about the world and what we believe we know. Game telephone. The story keeps changing. It's hard to remember details in a story. Call gist. And what you take as a point is how you then tell the next person. The way you interpret the story. Our memory for precise details is modest. And how we interpret things changes things a lot. Write the things you hear. Sour. Candy. Sugar. Bitter. Good. Taste. Tooth. Nice. Honey. Soda. Chocolate. Hard. Cake. Tart. Pie. This is a laboratory experiment. Testing about how we make real memories. And how we end up with false memories. They took the word sour. And asked to people. What is the first thing of that goes with sour? And came with candy, sugar, bitter, good, taste, tooth, nice, honey, soda, chocolate, hard, cake, tart, pie. But they left out one word that people came up with a lot: sweet. So, your mind interpreted the list. These are things that are related to sweet things. So, your mind imagined it here, the word sweet. Your mind imagined it was there. Because that was generally what was going on. The gist. Because the way memory works. We remember the gist of things. Because that's what's the important part. It's hard to remember the details. But that gist is an interpreted gist. Amazing power of the mind. And amazing peril of the mind. Automaticity. Power. In order for our mind to be efficient and quick. Does thing automatically without thought, consciousness. It let us walk without thinking a lot about where our feet are. Speak quickly without thinking about the syntax and vocabulary. Peril. When something becomes automatic. We lose control of it within ourselves. Experiment. Paris in the spring. Because your mind is automatically reading. You're barely looking at words like the. You're assuming over those things. Invisible even if they're physically present. Because your mind is looking for the big content, for the essential information. It becomes blind to what's in front of you. Because it knows what it's looking for. Readers that read at spectacular speeds. Because they don't look for little details. You get the big word and the big ideas and you zoom through for the big meaning. Kahneman and Tversky. In a room of 20 people, what's the probability that somebody have the exact same birthday? 70%. Most people say 10 to 30% because they don't see that happens very often. Heuristic, a simple way to think about it. That's incorrect. Because the math depends on not that's exactly your birthday. But any pair of birthdays among the 30 peoples. 36 people, 90%. 30 people, 70%. 24 people, 50%. Because when we face things that are hard to think about, because there's no easy answer, we tend to make a shortcut and say, what's the gist of my experience? And that's what I think the answer is. Even when a calculable answer is available. It's human nature to make a shortcut based on your sense of your experience. Dan Gilbert. Think about your future. What's our future paths? What kind of a life will we lead? Our future, it's on our mind. And a big question. What will make me happy in a deep sense? That's the life I want, low lead. Where will devote my time? So, most people think about achieving and succeeding, rather than tumbling or failing. They test people who were being reviewed for tenure. You get it or not? You'd rather get it than not. So, they ask them what happens if you don't get tenure. It's gonna be awful, miserable, unhappy person. 2 years later. The average happiness of people who didn't get tenure was equal to the average happiness of people who did get tenure. But what about if they won the lottery? After 2 years. The happiness is rated the same as the rest of people. How you measure happiness? The only thing we can do is to fill a scale from 1 to 7. But how much can we trust subjective reports of happiness? On the other hand, it's hard to know what would be better than that. So, they might say what they're supposed to say. Or pretend they're happy. We don't really know. Also, accidents leading to quadriplegia or paraplegia. It can be extremely difficult in many ways. But by self-report, ratings of happiness return to typical average populations of the same age in about 3 months. We wind up with, we are bad predicting what will make us happy or sad. It turns out we are wrong. Last experiment. Problems we have in dealing with racism. In USA/Canada. Racism is widely condemned, it should be. But examples of blatant racism still occurred. A third of white individuals reported hearing anti-black slurs in the workplace in the last couple years. So how does this happen in a society of not being racist? Treating everybody equally, fairly, and kindly. This is why it's hard to get society to change some of its behaviors. Experiment. Took 2 groups of college undergraduates. Forecaster how they think they would feel and how they would act under certain circumstances. Experience who actually undergoes an experience. And randomly assigned one to be in the forecaster group. So, in the experience group, pretend you were their research participant. You walk into a room. You see a black male and a white male. Both are Confederates. The experiment, it's just a show. They have a plan of what they're going to do. But the participant doesn't know that. The black male stands up and leaves the room to get his cell phone. And gently bumps the white male's knee. Now, there's 3 different groups. 1, nothing else happens, a small bump and the person leaves. 2, moderate, the white individual says typical, I hate it when black people do that, means to be provocative and racist. 3, extreme, the white guy says N-word. But you just think there was a bump. And something else may have happened. Then gives you a survey about how you feel right now. Then asks you to pick between those 2 people a partner. And what's the difference or similarity between what you say your feeling is, and what you really do? Results. Negative emotional distress. The higher the bar, the more you say, I feel really bad about what's just happened. Forecaster, you're in the situation but you're not in it. 1, no comment, average. 2, moderate, you would feel terrible. Look at the experiencer, both are the same, at moderate and extreme situation. The person on the spot is not processing this. They're filling out, feel average. It means the split between the values that the person thinks they would have, and the values that are responded to on the spot in the moment. So, there's a though gap, between the values we espouse, and how we act when there's unexpected difficult things. And afterwards you think what you should have done/said. But at that moment is not happening. Partly because you're weirded out, you can't sort it out. So, people tend to shrink to make a conclusion of what's going on. That's their attitudes. But, what about their actions? Who do they pick to be their partner? The forecaster says, if I was in this situation, I would never pick the racist white person to be my partner. but if the people are in the situation, the bars are almost the same. It's as if on the spot, in the moment. They can't process the values they feel and the action they're going to take. It's very hard to be brave and stand up to things. Because it's a human nature thing. When things are kind of weird. Because at first you think, I don't want to make a fool of myself, make trouble, maybe I'm not getting the whole picture. And we shrink back from acting in a way that aligns with the values. That's why it's very hard to stand up to things like oppression and bias. Because we tend to not act on our values when we're in complicated situations on the spot. How we interpret very different in our mind when we imagine we are there. And when we actually sit there. So, partly this is why it's hard to eradicate vestiges of stereotypes and racism. Because people have hard time clamping down on it in the moment. In short, scientific study of the human nature, mind, and behavior. What we see and hear is determined of how our mind interprets the world. How we remember things, is influenced by what we expect to see. How we think we know things. The relationship between how we feel and how we act, feelings are disconnected from actions in the moment.